Welcome, everyone. Really glad you could join us. My name's Chris Tretina. This is Vipul SavJani. We'll be talking today about large-scale enterprise transformation with microservices, PaaS, and DevOps. For the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be talking about specifically what Comcast has been doing in the realm of cloud transformation and how Accenture has been helping us to achieve our goals. To do so, we'll be focusing or honing in on the Enterprise Services Platform journey, or the ESP, which is our large-scale SOA initiative. Now, I imagine there are many among you, leaders and architects in your own organizations, who are thinking of embarking upon your own cloud transformation. To that end, we wanted to come up with some helpful tips, tell you what our experiences have been, and what we've learned along the way that might help you on your own path. But before we get into the meat of it, I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself and Comcast. So Comcast is the largest broadcasting and largest cable television provider in the world. We have over 153,000 employees, of which I get to be one of the lucky ones. I've been at Comcast now about 9 years, and in many ways my career development has closely mirrored the growth of the ESP. The ESP started just a few days before I've joined, and ever since then, our ties have been inextricably linked. So needless to say, I felt a very great deal of apprehension and excitement over moving to the cloud. This was my baby, and I wanted it to be very successful. So what is this ESP that I keep talking about? Again, it stands for Enterprise Services Platform, and it is our large, dare I say, monolithic, legacy SOA platform that powers a number of Comcast back-office systems. Everything from our customer portal, to our sales portal, to our IVR, and even Comcast.com all run through the ESP. And it's big, really big. We're talking 65 plus services, 250 million transactions a day, 200 plus external or internal consumers, 1,000 plus VMs. Needless to say, we had a lot of motivation to try to move to cloud, but we knew up front the journey was not going to be easy. So when we set out on our journey, we wanted to take a step back and identify what are the goals, what are the reasons that we're looking to do this. Certainly we didn't want to do it just because it was trendy or cool. We wanted to do it and identify what are the real business drivers that we're looking to address. And we came up with 4. The first is reduce time to market. We wanted to be able to build, deploy, and deliver business functionality faster and easier than ever before. To that point, we put together TDD, or test-driven development, continuous integration, continuous deployment, SOAP deployments, or Canary, and then also DevOps. In the end, we've been able to realize cycle time improvements, as Greg Otto mentioned in his keynote, from 3 months in some cases, all the way down to just a couple of hours. Pretty amazing. The second piece is around elastic scalability. And this is where we introduce PaaS and Cloud Foundry as the foundation of everything that we wanted to do on cloud. And certainly, we've been able to reduce our scale-out time from months all the way down to minutes. I'll digress and tell you a real short story. Beginning of this year, not long after we had rolled out our new platform, the business came to us with a request saying, hey, would it be really cool if every time customers logged on to Comcast.com, they were immediately presented with their balance? And of course, we said, that sounds like a great idea, but that's going to kill us. That is going to be a ton more traffic that we weren't expecting. Again, we were still thinking in lines of our old platform. So instead, we took the power of Cloud Foundry and scaled out in just a few minutes in order to meet the business demand. And the project was hugely successful. Many of you have probably seen it yourself now when you log on and unfortunately have to pay your bills to Comcast. It's just one of those things. The third item is increased resiliency. Probably as I'm speaking right now, we're testing this out live in production. So we've set up, using Cloud Foundry, multi-data center redundancy with a global server load balancer on top, and custom health checks so that whenever a failure occurs specific to one site, we can automatically move traffic over to the other. taking our MTTR down from 25 minutes to 30 seconds. And lastly, the next big one is decomposing the monolith. We want to take everything that we've done so far and start taking the services that we've just lifted and shifted and breaking them down into core microservices that each own and operate their own data. Now, to give you an idea of what our journey looks like in terms of time, we put together this quick slide, and then we'll go into details on each phase. In 2014, we laid the PaaS foundation. In 2015, we migrated our first services to production. In 2016, current year, we're spreading our DevOps culture shift to all of the other organizations. And in 2017 is really when we're going to try and go cloud native. So in 2014, as Greg had mentioned, is when for the first time our Steel Cloud or our cloud infrastructure team laid down and deployed Cloud Foundry up to production. We then took a couple of reference type implementation services and deployed them. And for the first time, we started to see what a world with PaaS might be like. We're able to do things where a single DevOps team could take a service, develop it, deploy it all themselves, all the way out to production without having to involve different production control teams and things of that nature. We were really excited, and we knew we were onto something big. What worked well for us is we started small and laid the foundation first. Probably the one thing we could have done differently, and you may consider when you try your own cloud transformation, is embedding some of your DevOps early adopters with your cloud infrastructure team from the beginning. You might be able to grow together and gain some quick wins that we probably could have realized too. Now in 2015 is when we really hit the ground running. That's where we stood up a central dedicated team charged with taking a handful of our most important services and migrating them through to production onto Cloud Foundry. Now, it should be noted there's a very high fixed cost for us attached to deploying even our most simple service. Why, you might ask? Well, over 9+ years of the ESP, we've come up with all kinds of custom frameworks and core components and common services that we had to rebuild from the ground up using Spring Framework and Spring Boot to make them cloud friendly. And that's exactly what we did. Now, where we really hit it out of the park, though, where we really nailed it, was tackling the highest value services first. So even though we only migrated a handful of services last year, we took 40% of the existing traffic off of the old ESP platform and moved it to the new. So I'm talking the most critical stuff here, stuff that if it breaks, it's not just one or two systems that are down, it's essentially Comcast that's down. So we were really aggressive with what we were trying to do, and it paid off huge. Now, one thing that we did learn is along the way, we started out last year with a very grandiose vision of wanting to do not only this deployment, but go to NoSQL and stand up active, and do all this decomposition all in one shot. And it didn't take us too long to realize we had bit off a little bit more than we could chew. So around mid-year last year, we pivoted and really tried to focus in and hone in on what are just the main services we want to deploy that'll get us the most benefit. Quick plug here for James Taylor sitting up front. His presentation will be at 5 on Sparrow, which is our activation platform. Very similar story to this one, much more architecturally focused. So you can get some more good details there of how to go about this. This year is taking what we did last year with our core team and extending it out to all of the other teams. So now we're taking all the big cultural learnings that Bridget mentioned in her keynote, because again, going to cloud without the culture isn't going to get you the kind of benefits that you're looking for. So things like Agile and DevOps and test-driven development, pairing and CI/CD, now we have 10+ ESP teams all migrating services using these principles. We're targeting almost 40 services this year. We're really moving now, and it's exciting. Nick Beanham, over here, will be chatting tomorrow and going in much deeper into the cultural aspect. Nick's been a huge change agent for us around how we want to look at our culture shift towards DevOps. Finally, looking ahead to next year is when we're going to try our next frontier of development, which is taking our existing services, which have been mostly lift and shift, and decomposing them down to true microservices. In so doing, we want to introduce the concept of a microservice doing one thing and doing one thing really well. We want to decompose down to services with discrete bounded contexts that own their own private data stores, and then we can stream data back and forth to our dependencies. This is big, and what Accenture is really helping us to do next is taking one of our existing services, one of our biggest, most complex, and breaking it down into microservices with event sourcing to give us the patterns and practices that we feel will benefit us in addressing all the rest of our services. So to summarize, our multi-year journey is very much still underway, and we're still learning as we go. Now, a couple pieces of advice, some tidbits to take away from this before I introduce Vipul. Start small, lay your foundation up front. Bring early adopters together quickly. They're called early adopters for a reason. Focus on the highest value services or applications first. If you're not sure which ones are the highest value, then I would recommend that you target the ones that you feel will free up the most DevOps cycles on your team. Because that extra bandwidth is what's going to allow you to do all the other things that you want to do in your organization. Then make sure to implement the cultural changes, because again, and probably as a number of folks, a number of other speakers have mentioned at this conference, going straight to cloud in and of itself isn't going to get you where you want to be. Implementing the true extreme programming principles is what's going to take you from a monolithic architecture to a true microservices one. And along those lines, avoid trying to tackle too much at once. Learn from our mistake there and try to go cloud-friendly first, cloud-native second. Iterate and get business value along the way. That's how you keep the investment going, and that's how you free up cycles. Now, one last piece of advice. Unless you happen to have people in your own organization that have been through a cloud transformation before, at a Facebook or a Google or an Amazon, find a partner. Find a partner like an Accenture or a Pivotal that you can trust. You're buying not only access to their services, but access to a wealth of knowledge and experience gained at a number of clients who are probably trying to solve a lot of the same problems that you are. So with that, I wanted to introduce our partner, Accenture, or Vipul SavJani, Director of PaaS Infrastructure at Accenture. Vipul?
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Chris. It's great to hear about Comcast's journey to cloud native and getting an opportunity to be part of that and help you. So my name is Vipul SavJani. I'm from Accenture, part of Global Emerging Technology practice. I lead the PaaS practice and really help our clients go through cloud native transformation journey and by adopting modern software technologies, engineering practices, and architecture. That's what makes them true cloud native. So what I want to do in this session is to step back and, you've been hearing a lot of cloud native journeys, including Comcast now, but I want to step back and kind of talk about Accenture's point of view on the cloud native transformation journey, and talk about why clients are doing this, what they need to focus on, and lastly, how they need to think about it. So it's really important to articulate why, what, and how of the cloud transformation journey. And I want to share some view that we have developed in Accenture, helping clients like Comcast. What I hope to get out of this is that, hopefully this gives you a framework to articulate your cloud journey. I mean, you've been hearing, Comcast and others' journey, and everyone has a unique things, but there's a lot of commonality between all of these customers' journeys. So the first is why are clients going through this? So you might have heard the famous the quote by Mark Andreessen that software is eating the world. What this means is that there are software companies who are really, through their, technology and, the way they build software, really disrupting traditional enterprises. And this is something a lot of our clients are seeing, and they're facing this disruption. So what they need to do in order to mitigate this is to become software-driven companies. And what that means is that they need to be able to deliver at the speed that software companies deliver, releasing features very fast, scaling, resiliency. A lot of this characteristic that digital native software companies exhibit, they need to embrace that and incorporate that into their organization. And the way they need to do that is by, there's a technology portion of it, which is, adopting things like PaaS and Cloud Foundry. There's an architecture portion like microservices. There's a methodology, DevOps and Agile. But they need to do that through adoption of those things. So what you see here is that first you need to articulate what are your drivers, what are your drivers that's driving you to the cloud native transformation. And what we've seen is speed is one of the primary drivers that if not all of our clients have, most of them have that. Agility, scale, resiliency, cost reductions. So you need to articulate what this is, what these drivers are for your journey, and then think about the cloud native solutions, right? Like microservices, DevOps, CI/CD, and the cloud platforms and infrastructure that you need to adopt in order to realize those. Now here, you can be doing cloud native, you can be using Cloud Foundry, but not in a way that it truly gives you a speed to market. It gives you resiliency or scaling. So you need to understand what are your drivers and why you're implementing a solution that you are. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that what does the cloud native, what does that really mean, right? So in an enterprise, what we are saying is that most of the organizations have legacy applications and infrastructure. Now you've heard this a lot, that a lot of issues that come up with the legacy platform, they're monolithic. It takes a lot of times to change those things, hard to scale, hard to maintain, etc. And by moving to cloud native, some of the benefits that you realize, right? You go from monolithic to microservices. You go from static infrastructure to more elastic, resilient infrastructure. You go from a centralized organization and centralized infrastructure to more decentralized. So those are some of the things that are involved in cloud native, and you should think about it. And the last thing here is, how do you go from your legacy to cloud native? And this is where I think a lot of organizations are struggling currently. So what we have done, and this is something we applied at Comcast, is we developed a framework for assessing organizations' capability and using this framework to actually do the transformation from legacy to cloud native. And what it involves really is, we see large organization going through two phases. First one is really looking at the portfolio or their infrastructure and doing a very quick assessment. Comcast has, the ESP platform has 65 services. Now, you need to be able to understand those 65 services and what it will take to move that. I mean, large organizations are not able to just on day one start coding. They need to kind of understand the roadmap, develop that. So one of the things that we help with is assess their portfolio and coming up with a view of how to do the transformation. So we have developed some automated tools and we augment that with a manual assessment to look at the existing systems and come up with what it would take to do that. And we have developed a method for that, which I'll talk about. And another thing is that we have to do this when you talk about 65 services or 100 services or even more. You have to do this in a very standard and structured way. A lot of the services or a lot of the applications that you have in portfolio have a lot of commonality. They typically use the same stack. They follow the same patterns. So we basically go through three types of things. First is we look at the platform compatibility of the platform or system. And what it means is that if you have a SOA-based platform, J2E, you have a traditional application server, databases, frameworks that are J2E based. So you look at all of the frameworks and technology that's involved in your portfolio and assess whether it's compatible with the target platform like Cloud Foundry. So the first step would give you an answer of how much of your portfolio is compatible with the target platform that you're going with. The second one, and actually, before I go to that one, what we do is that we look at, for Cloud Foundry, we look at a standard platform compatibility checklist. So this gives you a means of making sure that you don't miss anything. It makes sure that all the frameworks, the protocols, everything is compatible. So we use that as a reference to do the platform compatibility assessment. Second is we look at engineering practices. How is your code developed? What kind of coding practices, engineering practices it's following. And there we use a 12-factor application as a primary reference. What this allows us to do is, when you assess your applications against 12-factor, it gives you an answer whether it's going to run on a PaaS platform like Cloud Foundry. So that's a second step. And the third one is a more advanced architecture patterns. So this is where you go from your monolith, SOA-based architecture to microservices. So this helps you understand, what is your source and what is your target, what you need to do to transform it. So those are the three high-level things that we go through in order to understand your portfolio and transform a monolith to or legacy to cloud native. And in each one of the steps, what happens is that when you address all of the platform compatibility, you basically have your system that is going to be able to run on Cloud Foundry or PaaS platform. Then when you address the engineering practices, then it can actually start running on Cloud Foundry with sufficient CI/CD processes. And then ultimately, when you address the architecture patterns, you truly get a microservices-based platform. So that's the kind of a structured way of assessing and transforming your application that gives you value at each step of the way. So that's kind of the framework that we use for assessment and transformation. When we do the assessment, what happens at the end is that we come up with the scoring model. Basically what it shows is that you get for each application in your portfolio, you get a grade from A through F. And what this helps us understand is that where your application falls in and where you need to take them to get the most value. So a lot of times, most of the times you will end up in a grade C, which means that it's your traditional legacy application, SOA, J2E, running on WebLogic, WebSphere, that kind of a platform. And sometimes you'll also get existing applications that might get F and D, what that means is that it's using a framework or architecture pattern or the protocols that are not really compatible for PaaS and cloud. So you might end up getting that as well. And then you can, letter A and letter B are mostly where your applications are already running on cloud and they might not have some of the cloud native capabilities. So the results of assessment gives you, A through F grade, and then you can, using this, scoring model, you can then make a decision on where to go next. So what we see, the approaches our clients take and the challenges that they face is, most of their applications ends up being in a grade C category. And there are two high-level approaches that we help them with. One is more evolutionary, where you go from C to B to A in a step-by-step way. So what that means is that you're not, fundamentally starting over. You're taking the existing application, addressing the platform compatibility, some of the 12-factor challenges, and getting it to run on Cloud Foundry as it is. That may end up being a monolith running on Cloud Foundry. Then then once you start application running, then you can do more of a architectural decomposition, and a lot of times, that takes a while and it's challenging. So at least you get the applications running on the target platform, and then you can do that. So that's more of a evolutionary journey. You keep your existing application as it is, evolve it slowly and over time. And our customers end up taking this approach for applications that are not highly strategic, but something that they need to keep and and maintain their business running. Another approach that a lot of times our clients end up taking is going directly from C to A. Now, this is something that happens when you're working with a very strategic application, customer-facing applications that kind of drives your business. And in that case, what you have to do, and what we end up helping them with, is thinking about it from a product perspective, from a customer perspective of what the experience is, and then leveraging as much of existing code as possible, really rewrite that from a customer focused, product focused perspective. So that's more of a rethink and rebuild kind of approach, leveraging the existing application as much as possible. And what you will find in this type of an approach is every one of these transitions have their own challenges. So in the first step, you'll face challenges where you'll encounter things that are not compatible. So your application may have some protocol. It may be using a UDP protocols, or it may be implementing something custom at a network layer that is not compatible, or it's using a framework that's not compatible. It's using a file system. So you'll find a lot of those challenges that you'll have to address. And if you follow like 12-factor application and look at the Pivotal's platform compatibility checklist, you can address those challenges that you face in there. In the architecture step, you'll follow a typical problem of decomposing a monolith. It's really hard to do in a production system where you have to not only decompose logic, but also decompose data from a centralized to decentralized databases. So those challenges that you face in architecture are easy to think about from a conceptual perspective, but very hard to implement because you're dealing with large systems and live systems. So those are some of the architecture challenges you'll face. And in terms of transition from C to A, this is a completely different. This is where you need to engage your consumers if you're exposing APIs. If you are dealing with an application that have user interfaces or customer interactions, you need to engage product team very early on to kind of rethink that experience. So challenge you would think that you're rebuilding, there's a lot of technical challenge, but it turns out that the challenge is more around organization, being able to rethink from a product and customer perspective. So those are some of the challenges that come up here that you need to think about. It turns out that when you're rebuilding and rethinking with platforms like Cloud Foundry and frameworks like Spring, it's surprisingly very easy to develop new systems, new microservices, but it's really hard to get the right engagement from the product and customers and follow those cultural types of things. So that's kind of the approaches and challenges that our clients have taken, and some of the things that we help them address, and we're doing that at Comcast as well. So with that, questions? Yep.
You mentioned that one of the biggest challenges, or the biggest challenge, is organizational, sort of getting everybody on board. So I'm curious, one thing you didn't go into very much, was any organizational design changes that had to happen as part of this, to kind of go from a project mindset to a product with real ownership mindset. How did you do that? How did that change?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So I'll repeat the question back. So it was, what sort of organizational changes did we need to implement in order to migrate from where we were to where we have been? I'll give two answers. The first is we did do a level of realignment taking what was our existing operations teams, starting to seed them into some of the development teams as the beginnings of our DevOps evolution. In my humble opinion, there's a couple of layers of DevOps. The first is just dev and ops together in the same team. The second is when you start to have a level of cross-training. And then the third is when everyone in the team, developers alike, are all able to deploy. And that's really huge, but that initial seeding is important. And then the second thing, and a gentleman earlier today asked me this question, and I didn't go into detail on it, but this is a good opportunity. How did you go about doing a migration where you're going to affect 200 consumers at once? How did you get 200 people to change? Truth be told, we didn't. So what we did is we abstracted that away, and I would highly encourage you guys to do the same. We did 2 layers of trickery, I'll call it. The first layer of trickery was we took, even though the services we had, we were decomposing down into a level of microservices, we built SOAP adapters on top of them. So that way it kept the existing interface completely preserved, and all of our tests were, API 1 should return API 1 prime's response down to the character of the XML. And then the second piece was our central join point was our load balancer. So we did some real cool stuff there with our networking team, where we essentially could shift traffic back and forth between our old platform and our new, so that we could move consumers without them having to make any change. And truthfully, in a large corporate organization like Comcast, it's really the only real way to do it.
One thing I want to add to that is, I think you have to think about 3 things in your organization. One is, when you adopt a PaaS platform, you have this, platform team, right? The team that is really caring and feeding for the Cloud Foundry platform. So that becomes a new thing in an organization, that they need to maintain this platform as a product and service that. Then the second thing is that your team, the application development teams become, you need to have application development teams that are more self-sufficient. So the end-to-end teams that not only are doing development, but also doing an operation of that application on the on Cloud Foundry, for example. And I think the third type of an organization change that is really important is having that product mindset. Traditionally, you have, there are business analysts that are separate, and then it's a very waterfall model for developing a product. But as you move to this, cloud native, what it allows you to do is truly have a product-oriented teams that are delivering features and are responsible for KPIs at a product level rather than, just a technical thing. So I think if you think about DevOps, platform teams, self-sufficient application teams, and then a product-oriented and customer-oriented culture is probably the biggest thing that I've seen.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, when you were talking about...
At time? All right. Sorry, guys. Indication is we're out of time. Want to be respectful to the next speaker.